Welcome to the Sword and The Trowel, a podcast of Founders Ministries. Founders Ministries exists for the recovery of the gospel and the reformation of churches. I'm Jared Longshore.
And I'm Tom Ascol.
Thanks for listening to the Sword and The Trowel today. A big thanks to our fan members. If you're a part of the Founders Alliance membership, we are grateful for your support and excited about continuing to upload content to you there in the armory and continue to resource you as you labor for reformation in the church as well. We've been really looking forward to this conversation because we have Timon Cline on the line.
Yeah, Timon Cline, who has written, I think the only article, I can say this safely, the only article in the Founders Journal ever to have been published that has 192 footnotes. So,
192?
I counted them. So we'll talk about that in a moment. Hey, Timon, welcome to the Sword and the Trowel. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, Timon is graduating next month in the midst of this pandemic from Westminster Seminary with a Master of Arts in Religion, and decided to go ahead and graduate from Rutgers Law School as well at the same time. So he
just double up.
Yeah, you know. So what do you do in your spare time?
In my spare time, I write about critical theory. That's what I do.
Yeah, well, we appreciate you joining with us. And man, the article, I don't remember. I don't know if you sent it to me or Tom Nettles or something, but I don't remember how I first.
I think Dr. Nettles is who I sent it to first. And you made the comment about the length and the footnotes, and I was totally conscious of that, sending it to him, and thought for sure he would. There's no way he'd be able to do anything with it. So I actually was a little dishonest. I made the font smaller so it looked like it would fit on a page, on less pages, and tried to, make the footnotes downplay them just because I thought it's way too long. I won't take it.
Yeah, I used to do that in seminary. I'd make the font larger, so I wouldn't have to write it on pages. It looked like I had content on the page. Yeah.
But he liked it, so I was so pleased that you guys were willing to entertain such a crazy idea.
Yeah, it's been great conversations, and Jared and I have talked through parts of it, and we've done it with some other staff members here. It's been really good, and I think it's a wonderfully useful article for this particular time. And again, the footnotes, 192 of them, I haven't read every one of them, but I can tell you I got lost in some of them, man, because I'd click through and I'd click through more, and it's just gold. The stuff that you've gathered together is valuable. So I would say to everyone, read this article on identity politics and the bondage of the will. It's in, I think, the fall edition of the Founders Journal, fall 2019.
Yeah, fall 2019. The journal's called Critical Theory and Christian Theology, and you can we'll put that in the footnotes so everybody can get access to that. Before we even get into maybe some of the content, Timon, just take a step back. Why did you write this? What sparked you to pick up your pen and deal with critical theory?
Yeah, so I went to ended up graduating from a secular state school for my undergrad, and was exposed pretty unwittingly to a lot of this. This type of thinking is ingrained in a lot of disciplines now, as we may end up talking about. But I remember going through classes that would be, race, gender, and sex, and business, or whatever it was attached to, but was not a hyper-aware student in my undergrad years, and just kind of assumed this must be secular and or liberal thinking that you can kind of dismiss and move on. And then I went to grad school, to law school, and was exposed to, as time went on, it's not like there's a critical theory 101 course every law student is taking, but this, especially as you get into upper level courses, especially policy courses where you're looking at different contemporary issues that are kind of a developing thing, you will see more and more of this type of thinking that was becoming recognizable to me. But again, there's crazy things that go on at universities, and in some ways they should be that way. But when I, during the 2015, 2016 years, began to see some of this stuff crop up in discussions between Christians, and specifically at certain conferences, out of certain speakers and certain publications, that became pretty concerning, because I knew enough to at least be able to identify something of what it was, and that I had seen it before in a different context. So that's when I started taking it serious to get into it, to really read the primary sources on a lot of this. It's endless, and I'll never catch up to what Neil Shindy's doing. He must read one of these books every day or something. But I say I can't do that because I'm busy with grad school. But he homeschools like 4 kids, so I don't know what my excuse is. But there's endless stuff out there, and it's surprisingly enough, these people are very honest about what they think and what they're doing most of the time. Mm-hmm. But as I said, it was once you started seeing some of this talk crop up in, especially 2016. I mean, the 2016 political scenario changed a lot of stuff.
Right.
And this is one thing that rose to the surface, and you had certain conferences going on that this talk was coming up at. And
what conferences?
Yeah. I remember, certain TGC and ERLC conferences that year that you would were commemorating the legacy of MLK, which I found troubling for lots of reasons. But you had some of this talk there out of certain speakers, and I think really after that, I see that as a moment in all of this, at least for evangelicals, that marked a shift. And a lot of that was because I think there was some objections raised to the nature of the conference itself, which then seems to have changed the discourse, where people felt comfortable responding to that criticism in a certain way that it didn't seem to be present before. And that's where I think, especially after the conference, the fallout of that conference, and then some other unrelated ones. You have certain people like Akimini Yuan that has done the Sparrow Conference, and other ones that were unrelated, but those all come afterwards. So the 2016 MLK 50 conference seems to me to be a big moment for all of this, at least for how explicit everyone was being and what they were doing.
Yeah, I think that might have been 2018. I think that was
Oh, was the MLK 2018? I was thinking it was 2016.
Yeah, I think it was. It's 50th anniversary.
Okay,
that's right.
Yeah.
So
that conference, though, I think is really when you got to see it afterwards. I think it was a pivotal moment. Whatever year it was, it's all. This feels like it's 2025 at this point, but it's still April. So no, but yeah, I think those. I remember that summer. It was in the summer, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. You started seeing a lot more out of Christians, right? That's what was concerning to me. And along with that, you also got to see some responses, and there's been good responses out of a lot of Christians. I think the kind of impetus for me writing this article was, I think it would be great if Christians were able to look at some of this talk that's typically referred to as identity politics talk, but there's an underlying coherent ideology behind that, which is coming out of critical theory and all of its offshoots. So I think it'd be great if Christians could look at that and identify it as what it is, which is a separate worldview and religion that's fundamentally antithetical to Christianity. But it doesn't seem that people are doing that. And so you're going to have to take this step by step, I think, doctrine by doctrine to a certain extent, to prove to people how incompatible it really is. And I was seeing a lot of good responses on this front, identifying what critical theory is. Like I mentioned, Neil Shindy earlier has done a ton of that work. It's encouraging to see more and more leaders like Carl Ellis and Owen Strachan and different people. Al Mohler, of course, is on point as always with this stuff, coming out against the thinking behind identity politics. But what I didn't see was a lot of people engaging with the ideas of critical theory at a very granular level, and taking a particular doctrine that conflicts with it out of historical orthodoxy and Christianity, in showing how that is or how that exists.
Yeah,
I didn't see a lot of that, so that was why I started writing this one. Was to try to do that.
I think that's well put, and that's quite honestly what we have been grappling with as well, because we're grateful to see guys dealing with this on a theoretical level, and that's beginning to happen. And praise God for it. It's been more vocal over the last year or so. But our concern continues to be, when is this going to be dealt with on the ground level? And that's where it seems like the theory stays at 30,000 feet, and here we are on the street, man, and this stuff is overwhelming us, and we need resistance. We need to defy it. And that there doesn't seem to be a lot of that going on within evangelical leadership right now.
Yeah. I think it's a difficult task. I mean, I did, this article addresses an issue of anthropology, and that seemed to me to be the most natural starting place, because of what I'd seen going on. But if you're a systematic theologian, you don't usually begin there. You begin with your theology proper or some other doctrine. So it's kind of, it's weird to try to figure out, first of all, what critical theory is doing, which you have to go to good sources to do that, to figure that out. Then you got to figure out what primary areas of Christian theology are being attacked by this alternate worldview. And the one that, stuck out to me, because in every conversation I was hearing it would come up, is the dignity of people, right? That's central to the social justice movement, and especially in its Christianized form, the dignity of people and the Imago Dei is frequently invoked, right? That's almost the beginning of every conversation, and it certainly resonates with Christians and tugs on your heartstrings, because we do care about the dignity of people. The problem is no one was ever defining what that is, or what we think about the dignity of people, and why that's a distinguishing mark, not only of the Christian worldview, but of course of Scripture from where we draw it. It's all throughout it. So that seemed like the natural starting place. Is you have to address this thing that everyone's talking about, and it's kind of getting them purchased in the conversation to be able to talk about this other way of viewing the world and pursuing justice and human dignity, and figure out if, one, they're defining it the same way, and two, if their theory allows them to do that, and for us to have any common ground in this area. So the anthropological and social area is where this conversation, is primarily taking place. And I think go ahead.
I was going to say, you've done a deep dive here into kind of even some of the historical roots, and then dealing with the anthropology as seen from critical theory, and then over against Christian doctrine. One of the things that has been said is that whatever the, say, Reformed evangelical community did with critical theory, it wasn't really being played by critical theory, right? It was just, maybe we were just kind of using the tools, we were washing some of the ideas off, and then we weren't really being duped. Critical theory really wasn't making significant inroads into evangelical life and thought. And I'm fascinated by your having experienced critical theory in another field, like you say, in your studies, with law, you've seen it. And then you saw it crop up in evangelical talk. So it might be hard to go all the way to the abstract here, but if you were to look back over the last couple years between the conferences and the teachings, things you've seen, how much does critical theory actually map onto what you've seen in kind of the Reformed evangelical world? Is it true that Reformed evangelical world really wasn't trying to use critical theory, or is your assessment that no, there was absolutely, you're going to have to go back here and pull it out by the roots, because there was some real mapping going on?
Yeah, I mean, it's this in some ways is a multi-layered question, or a difficult one to answer. On the most basic level, the highest level, I would say there's with no doubt in my mind that it is real critical theory in its contemporary form. I mean, this is how ideas develop. They don't stay stagnant. They keep moving. So I think Neil Shimby and Pat Sawyer will call it contemporary critical theory. James Lindsay has called it critical social justice, whatever you want to call it. The contemporary form of this way of thinking, which has not departed significantly from its roots, but only expanded or added onto it. There's no doubt that is influential in broader evangelicalism, and certainly the SBC and certainly the PCA. I mean, I think there's the documentary you guys put out, it would have been sufficient just to do video clips of speakers, because that's proof enough. You could have done 5 hours of that.
You think that would be enough?
You would think, and that stuff is out there. Same thing with the PCA. So the two biggest denominations in that way, it's all out there to see. And I'm kind of tired of the objection from people that we don't, that the rest of us are incapable of figuring out what critical theory is and then being able to identify it in real time. So the constant, and I think actually the conversation is starting to move away from that initial objection to admitting that, yes, this is what we're doing. Now we just want to defend our use of it. I mean, that's a lot of what Resolution 9 starts to do, is you move away from the initial conversation was, no, that's not what this is, to now, yes, that is what it is, but it's compatible, or maybe we're using it in a limited way. So that seems to be where the shift has gone. But I don't, that discussion of how you can use this, the question that I've kept asking people that no one's able to answer, and I don't, because there is not a good answer, but no one's been able to answer it, is what is the indispensability of critical theory? Because we just the other day, Jonathan Lehman gave a speech at the T4G conference on identity politics.
Right.
And one of the deficiencies of that speech is that he treats identity politics as a phenomenon that's cropped up in a vacuum, which is without ever really addressing the underlying ideology, which is critical theory thinking. But the second thing he does, and I think they're connected, is he wants to talk about how identity politics is an unexpected ally. It teaches us things, or reminds us of things such as the pursuit of justice, even though they don't mean the same thing as we do, or the other systemic sin, potential for sin at a systemic level. The problem is those insights are not unique to critical theory. The ones we pull out and want to emphasize, they come from other places. The reason Lehman is able to draw a parallel there is because we already think that. So that's not bringing us something new. So what is the indispensability of this way of thinking that justifies the risk of getting, within 100 yards of this stuff?
That's interesting.
And no one's been able to answer that.
I'd love to riff on that for a little bit, because I haven't watched this or heard this from Lehman, but it just strikes me as saying like Darwin's an unexpected ally in the pursuit of science. It's like, I get it. Because the subject, you're talking about justice, and if you say, well, they're not even pursuing the same topic as we are, but they're kind of pretending to do it. Well, you can look to other places and see that kind of thing. But at least what you said there is where I do feel a lot of people in the Reformed evangelical world are. They're like, hey, we really can learn. We can learn something from. And you're right. They're missing the underlying. They're missing that this is another religion. And I don't know if you would go back to the Hegelian dialectic, or I've used language as just this materialistic world. I use language of Peter Jones stuff about oneism. It's basically a worldview in which there is no God. Secular humanism might be the easiest way to say it. And why are we having such a difficult time helping guys to see that void between secular humanism and the critical theory and the intersectionality that grow out of it and the Christian worldview? Why can't we help guys see like it's a dumpster fire, just burn it down and don't think about it?
Yeah. No, I think, and in fact, one of the if you read Roger Scruton's writings on this type of thinking, he calls it Humanist Marxism. So it is emphasizing some of those roots and what they're doing. But I think it seems to me there's all these offshoots, as I mentioned in the article, of critical theory. You have feminist theory, of course, and it's third wave here, and then you have family theory, queer theory, critical pedagogy, all these kinds of disciplines. But the one that's obviously most in play now is critical race theory, right? And especially in the SBC, but I would say in America generally, it's critical race theory that's having the most influence because of certain historical, facts about our country and even the SBC denomination that people have to grapple with because the sin is real. So the critical race theory seems to be, serving a need for certain people who think that their theology is deficient to address certain problems. And this has come in at a opportune time, and it's useful. I mean, Jonathan Leeman, to go, not to hate on him, but it's just the most recent one. I very much appreciate Jonathan Leeman. I've learned a lot from him. His book, Political Church, is a good book, and I recommend it to people all the time. But so he's a very smart guy, and he knows his stuff, and he knows his general political theory and all those kinds of things. So it's interesting to me that he, in that speech the other day, was doing that. To me, it's somewhat, I can't speak for him, but it's what's happening a lot where people are scratching and clawing to find common ground with this stuff because it serves a particular need. Which is a way to deal with racial reconciliation and justice issues that are being emphasized by our culture right now, and are things that have been in conversation in evangelicalism for a long time. And this seems to be a new way a fresh way of talking about it and thinking about it. And as people will often say, race is different. In the way that you treat it. And this is proving, it's become a self-fulfilling prophecy in many ways because we are treating it differently. We don't treat any other subject this way, where we don't address another problem this way as we have the discussion of racial reconciliation and the use of critical theory. So I don't know if that answers the question well, because I don't have a good answer for why people are unable to see how diametrically opposed a critical theory mindset is to a Christian one. But I think on a very instinctual level, or on a less kind of seriously thinking level, people are adopting some of this talk because it's convenient and because it seems to help with something that we've been unable to solve up till now.
Yeah, or I think that I think people are easily manipulated emotionally on some of these issues, especially like race. Yeah. You look at it, no denying the horrific things that have happened, and so you feel badly about that. And here comes somebody that says, okay, if you feel badly about that, really, then this is what you must see, this is how you must think, this is what you must do. And what you said a while ago about the indispensability of critical theory, can somebody show you that? That's a great way to frame the question, because we can learn all kinds of things. You said Darwinism, Nazism did a lot of research in trauma therapy. We could learn from Nazism, but who in the world would ever say that's a good idea? Maybe 100 years from now, they might. Yeah. And it feels like a sleight of hand to me to take these categories that the Bible speaks to. I think in your article you mentioned the commodification of people in capitalism. Okay, Marxism criticizes that, rightly so. But you don't have to go to Marx to learn how to treat people made in the image of God. And why in the world would you? So to do that and then to say, oh, here are the insights, and if you really are going to stand against racism, you've got to become now, what's this anti-racist movement and buy into these principles of allyship. And it's a sleight of hand. We're being duped. We're being played.
I think you go ahead, Timon. I'll follow up.
Oh, well, I was just going to real quick off of what you were just saying then. I think that's absolutely right. And you mentioned anti-racism. Anti-racism as a concept is a perfect example of what you're talking about and how people are handling it, because one of the things I think is attractive about critical theory is that it's essentially presents a unitary explanation for the world. So it's a totalizing theory, and it starts making everything make sense, right? Things become much less complicated all of a sudden. But because it's a totalizing theory, you can't be arbitrarily pick and choose how you're going to apply it. So anti-racism, which I've heard evangelical pastors present as something akin to anti-sin, is the idea there. And that's not the idea. If you read Ibram Kendi, the idea is it can't just be I'm against racism. And by the way, the definition of racism has changed.
Right.
So it's no longer just about I'm against hatred of other people because of the melatonin content of their skin. Now the definition is all of us have prejudice. That's just assumed without any proof. We're all prejudicial. Only white people have the systemic privilege and power to be able to exercise that prejudice. And so they are the only ones who are racist. You have to have systemic power to be a racist. And so to be against that is to be an activist against it, right? You have to be breaking down the power structures and problematizing the social narratives that are told by the dominant culture. But Kendi also says to be an anti-racist is to be anti-homophobia, anti-transphobia, anti-Islamophobia, all of the phobias that people are accused of. So you can't be an anti-racist unless you're also defending homosexuality, right? He says it's everything, all or nothing. And so the problem with like you're talking about, people being duped, is you're adopting things that are not quite clear on the surface, and you think you're doing something good. You see one insight that you like, and you're trying to grab onto that. But critical theory doesn't allow you to be selective arbitrarily. It's all or nothing in this stuff. So that the idea that these are separable analytical tools doesn't seem at all consistent to me with the theorists themselves.
Yeah, you calling it an absolutizing theory is what causes such pastoral concern in our minds and hearts. That's why I was talking to a friend that was caught up in this whole critical theory, very involved in Resolution 9 and for it. And it's funny. I told him, I said the reason we did by what standards is because we love people and we don't want them to get caught up in this worldview. People do go away. I said, man, we knew it was going to be a heavy cost, and it's not because we're racist or misogynist and it was funny. He stopped and he goes, well, I've called you all those names. And I said, well, it was so weird. It was like talking across a great divide. I'm like, seriously, because in my world, that's just silly. Like, no, I'm see the worldview. I see this absolutizing theory. Once you buy it and things start to make sense to people, don't drift away from that. Which you have already heard in watching Josh Harris do that, quite honestly, and we can see the threat of it. So we're trying to shepherd folks away from it. That's why I ask you the question, which seems to be such a pressing one to me. Why can't we why do I keep having evangelical leaders who I love talk about it as an ally? Stop talking about this as an unexpected ally. That's not what it is. And I think one of the reasons even Reformed evangelicals are having trouble with this is because of our fragmented thinking. We're so fragmented that we don't see that ideas have consequences. If you buy into this idea, it's going to shake down. It's going to produce fruit, and you need to be able to see the connection between the idea and the consequence. And you end your article there. Your conclusion is called "Ideas Have Consequences, and Analytical Tools Do Too." So I'm trying to gear this toward, I'm thinking about people that might be listening to this, pastors especially, that hear some of this language and they hear, 1,072 footnotes from Timon Cline's article, and they think, I'm not a legal scholar, I can't get into this stuff, I don't understand it. I want pastors to, one, see their responsibility, because this is a philosophy that we're supposed to stand against and warn our people about. You don't have to know all the ins and outs and the history of critical theory, but you have to be able to understand that there's a God in heaven and all truth is his truth, and therefore you need to see the consequences. So could you spell out a few of those consequences as you see it that might help a guy like that connect the dots? Okay, this is why it's not an ally, because if you buy it, it's going to produce this kind of fruit. What are some of those? Can you point out some of those, or Just
yeah, I mean, the central thesis of the paper is really one about preserving our theology. I'm much more interested in knowing our theology well so that we can defend it from all manner of attacks than everyone really diving into critical theory. One, it's mind slaughter and it's boring, but so I don't recommend it. But not everyone needs to know about every enemy to the nth degree, right? So what I really would love people to do is know their theology, especially to be committed to a confessional outline of your theology that has stood the test of time and has historical merit to it, and to know it so well that when you see something new like critical theory come into the discussion, you're able to identify immediately what are the inconsistencies between the two ways of thinking, that it is opposed to your pre-commitments that are grounded in a historic confession and the confession of the church throughout time. And so, the central point of this article is our view of man, of human nature, prohibits us from adopting this way of viewing the world. Mm-hmm. And this, even though I go into critical theory, at length, trying to acquaint people with it, the basic thing that I want people to grasp about critical theory for the purpose of my argument is that it groups people according to involuntary associations, right? That's how it organizes society. So it's based on race, class, sex, sexual orientation, whatever it is how it's manifested in our current society. And it groups everybody and evaluates you morally, most importantly, and makes these associations politically actionable. It's what it bases society on. And that is fundamentally inhuman, as I call it, based on Christian commitments to what makes man unique, which is his rational soul, right, which is breathed into him by God at creation, right? So, and he's given an intellect and a will, and the will then becomes, putting aside for a moment our sociological considerations, the will is what makes its operation is what makes things human. Animals don't have those; they have instincts. Mm-hmm. And so when you know that, and then an ideology comes along telling you, no, the way we're going to evaluate society and life and morality is based on which class you're involved in, which we predetermine at the outset, and what your background is. That should immediately send up red flags, to the extent that even without knowing all that much more about it, you can protect your congregation and your family from that way of thinking, because you know your own theology so well that you are able to find identify the things that conflict with it at the outset. That would be my wish for regular pastors.
Yeah, and I think you've done that in the article very well, and I really believe most pastors and most thinking Christians get that. I just think if you've been involved with the Bible's been transforming your thinking at any level. You have this in you. Where I think the point of contention comes, or failure, is really with courage and standing against the onslaught, being willing to pay the price for saying, no, I reject your label of racism. I'm not a racist by your definition. No, we are not going to define justice on these terms. Yeah. Because once you do that, that's where you get labeled, the racist, the misogynist, the homophobe.
Yeah. And some of that, I agree with 100% with the courage aspect, which is easier said than done. I think Douglas Murray, who's obviously not a Christian or a pastor, has talked before about that, of the main thing lacking today is just courage, because regular people, even if they don't get all the ins and outs of cultural Marxism, can know that there's something off about it. Right. But there is an aspect too that it's one of the frustrating things about certain presentations of at least pieces of critical theory. It's always selective by evangelicals is the misdefining of it in a way that's not consistent with the theorists themselves, but allows them to kind of bring it in and use it, as we were talking about earlier, And seeing things like white fragility defined as all it's doing is pointing out pride. Well, that's just not true. That's not what white fragility is doing. But presenting it that way, then, for pastors that are being put under pressure and are trying to be courageous, when other intellectual or thought leaders in evangelicalism present this as so easily adopted, it gives them a way out. And so I think some people have capitulated with a false understanding of what they're capitulating to is a problem as well. So that's something that a lot of pastors are being done a disservice by. But even those that would like to be courageous, they're being told this is something that's okay, and it's not. So.
Good point.
Yeah, very good, Timon. Man, it's been so good to have you on the Sword and the Trowel podcast and kind of take a deeper look into your article and what we're seeing going on in the Reformed evangelical world. So we will put this article in the footnotes. Do check it out. Enjoy. In the show notes, not the footnotes. You'll have plenty.
That make 193.
Yeah, make 193.
No more of those
footnotes. So it's been great to have you on, Timon. We have to do this again sometime.
Yes, definitely. And
thank you guys so much,
man. And I'm glad to know you're in Naples. You're not far from us, so
not far at all.
You could come a lot closer and still be compliant with all the social distancing guidelines
Absolutely.
Now.
You're allowed to do drive-thrus down here?
That's right.
To drive, okay.
Yeah,
okay.
man. We can do a drive-through conversation or something. But thanks so much for being with us. Hey, we want to remind everybody that for the next week or so, we still have going on a 25% off everything in the Founders Bookstore. So all of our books are on sale for that price, and we've got some wonderful titles. We also got a couple of new titles coming up that you can be on the lookout for. You want to introduce what's coming?
Yeah, Daniel Scheiterer, and the book is called Still Confessing. It's an exposition of the Baptist Faith and Message 2000. And if you are in the SBC, mark my words, since everyone and their mother doesn't want to acknowledge this, our Constitution of the Southern Baptist Convention says that a cooperating church, a church that's in the SBC, has to be in general agreement with the Baptist Faith and Message 2000. Believe it or not, everyone says, no, it does. And it does have teeth. It's not just that you can't give money. It's that you're not going to get the resources and you're not going to be a part of the Southern Baptist Convention. And we even removed churches. It was only like 3 years ago that we removed a church for not being in keeping with our Baptist Faith and Message 2000 principles and ethical commitments.
Does this mean that you got to actually practice the Christian religion in order to be in good standing with the SBC?
You
and the Baptist
do.
Faith and Message?
You do. So if you're a pagan church,
then are doing pagan worship.
If you're doing pagan worship,
I want to be clear on this now. I don't want to overstep.
We love all people,
right.
Just like Jesus. Right. God loves all people. We love all people too.
Okay.
But there are borders to our fellowship, as there have been all throughout the history of the church. And no, you can't preach a false gospel and continue to be in happy cooperation with the Southern Baptist Convention. So if you want to take a little bit of a look into that confession, do read it. It's online, and we've got a book that is an exposition of it, and you can get it right now on the cheap because we have a sale going on. So check out the Baptist Faith and Message 2000. That's the subtitle. The actual title is Still Confessing.